When I originally saw the photograph, this photograph here, I figured that these lines were like the tracks of a four-wheeler or the tracks of an animal that walked probably to say to the east or to the left of the photograph and then turned around and came back and made a parallel track. Well, now I know that those marks are the evidence of a previous fracture a year before that had refrozen. It fractured the ice bridge, had already fractured the year before and refroze. Big story in 2009, 2010 is, will the ice bridge collapse and let all these icebergs out to sea where they will eventually melt in the warmer ocean and cause sea level to rise? Well, those marks that I figured were animal tracks over a space of less than a mile turned out to be the cracks in the ice that had refrozen and then were covered with snow again, leaving a slight trace like a fractured bone that healed and left a scar, a fracture scar. And so it turns out this so-called ice bridge was non-existent, and lo and behold, this area is mighty gosh awful small compared to the huge continent of Antarctica. Boys and girls around the world, this is going to be hard to explain, and it'll be hard to get you interested in this. I've been obsessed over some photographs of an ice sheet that supposedly fell loose of Antarctica, and I noticed all the photographs were dated around 2009, and I wondered what has become of it since. And I tried to find recent photographs. Well, there are no recent photographs. This is a story that was forgotten in terms of satellite photographs. What we have today are people in airplanes and boats flying between these huge chunks of ice. huge fragments. Imagine if you dropped a pane of glass on the ground and it broke into several large pieces. And then you shrunk down to the size of less than an ant and photographed the edges of these towering cliffs, which seen from above would look like a big old fragment, and some of these fragments are like a mile long. And it's several meters high above the water. Well, I couldn't find any photographs posted on the internet of the recent icebergs as seen from above to show the thinning of this ice shelf or not, or did they refreeze? Best I can determine, it's basically unchanged over the years. But I finally stumbled upon an intriguing thing. When I originally saw the photograph, this photograph here, I figured that these lines were like the tracks of a four-wheeler. Well, now I know that those marks are the evidence of a previous fracture a year before that had refrozen. It fractured the ice bridge, had already fractured the year before and refroze. And the big story in 2009, 2010 is, will the ice bridge collapse and let all these icebergs out to sea where they will eventually melt in the warmer ocean and cause sea level to rise? Well, those marks that I figured were animal tracks over a space of less than a mile turned out to be the cracks in the ice that had refrozen and then were covered with snow again, leaving a slight trace like a fractured bone that healed and left a scar, a fracture scar. And so it turns out this so-called ice bridge was non-existent, and lo and behold, this area is mighty gosh awful small compared to the huge continent of Antarctica. And the ice is thousands of meters thick, and it don't hardly never melt. When I first saw this story for the first time a couple of days ago, I thought, this is ridiculous. This is laughable. This is such a small collapse. It's typical. And it's such a small collapse. It's small and it's typical. This is a big deal out of nothing. I would be ashamed to write a story like this or to give an interview to somebody who reports it at the Snow and Ice Data Center, National Snow and Ice Data Center. That's my first impression. This story is a joke. And then I began to think, well, what happened to the story that came out in 2009, I thought it came out in 2009. I wanted to see some recent satellite photographs so I could see for myself from the air if all these icebergs drifted out to sea and melted. Or did they remain there and get stuck? Did they refreeze? It gets really cold in that area. It's briefly right at 32 along the coastline in the summer for a few days, few weeks. Briefly at 32. The rest of the year, it's well below freezing. I wondered, and I imagined that these icebergs were largely still there. And I couldn't find any satellite photographs. So I figured, well, this story, this is a 2009 story, and it fizzled out. People lost interest in it. That's why there are no photographs posted on the internet. Nowhere. And I searched and I searched for photographs. 2010, 2011, 2013, 2014. Does anybody have a photograph of this little tiny area of a little peninsula on a huge continent that's covered with ice and always below freezing? So cold I can't even remember. It's just like 100 degrees below freezing. And the snow and ice is not just a few hundred meters thick, it's thousands of meters thick, and it's always below freezing. I know this is boring, but maybe one or two of you will be intrigued by this story. I'm about to get to my point. Well, I finally found out in the course of making the video that this story has been around, as you just saw, since 1999. They first noticed the Wilkins ice shelf disintegrating in 1998. And I really suspect that it has not changed very much since. Every summer, every late summer in the Arctic, which would be the fall, be around September in North America, these icebergs temporarily become semi-loose because the ice in between them and the snow in between them melts and leaves the big huge chunks loose again. They come loose every late summer in the Arctic around September, our time. And I finally realized, and the truth hit me in the face, this story gets repeated every September in the U.S. news media and probably the world news media, because I recently saw ABC and NBC telling about these icebergs as though they had never mentioned it before. And they never show it from the air. They show people zooming around in boats and zooming around in airplanes real low. Close-up shots of huge icebergs a mile long. You never show it from space, from a satellite, because if they did, it would be obvious that nothing has changed. But they still hype this false story year after year for 15 years.